directed against anyone. We're not acting in a way that would cause problems for anyone. Our combined actions are aimed at creating stability on the global energy markets so that consumers, producers, and suppliers feel safe, stable, and secure.
The United Arab Emirates, along with Russia and Saudi Arabia, are a key OPEC Plus member, and all OPEC members were under fire last week for agreeing on a production cut of 2 million barrels a day, which saw oil prices climb. Most of the anger is low. In fact, it's been widely reported that American diplomats ahead of the OPEC Plus meeting in Vienna put an enormous amount of pressure. American diplomats ahead of the OPEC Plus meeting in Vienna put an enormous amount of pressure cut, but it didn't work. And there you have it. The president forced them to refuse the production cut, but it didn't work. And there you have it. The president of the United Arab Emirates that, at least for now, Arab countries are nowhere with Russia. It only shows that, at least for now, Arab countries are nowhere near the ranks of Russia haters. While the EU endeavors to rid itself of Russian energy supplies, the bloc has been increasing its dependence on American shipments of liquefied natural gas, which, as France has pointed out, costs exponentially more than imports from nearby Russia.
The conflict in Ukraine must not end in American economic domination and a weakening of the EU. We cannot accept that our American partner sells its LNG for 4 times the price at which it sells it to.
Countries have risen sharply in recent months. Let's give you some numbers to give you a really good idea here. Washington sold more than $9 billion of natural gas in oil. Give you a really good idea here. Washington billion from just the same period 2 years ago. August, that is an increase of 7 billion from just the same period 2 years ago. It's also, as the EU's top diplomat has...
Our prosperity has been based on cheap energy coming from Russia. On the other hand, we delegated our security to the US. We have to take a bigger part of our responsibility on securing security. US takes care of our security. You, China, and Russia provide the basis of our prosperity. This is a world that is no longer there.
Well, politicians say one thing, but the people do another. Have a look at these pictures right here. Crowds taking to the streets in the eastern German city of Leipzig to protest the rising energy costs. Demonstrators held up taking to the streets in the eastern German city of Leipzig to protest the rising energy costs. Demonstrators held up pickets and signs in support of rebuilding economic ties with Russia. Some read, "Open Nord Stream 2 immediately." Others read, "The nations are, quote, friendly together."
We must
Necessary to continue to negotiate with Moscow.
We must continue to talk to Vladimir Putin. The opposite would be irresponsible. There will be an aftermath. The war will one day stop, and Russia will always be our neighbor.
So we got reaction from economist and political commentator Eike Hammer. He's always a good guy to have here on the program. Very, very lucid thoughts. He says there's an old, familiar game currently being played.
The US is doing everything to keep Europe dependent on them, to make the old game that the Brits have done before, to keep disharmony on the continent, to rule outside and to rule from the outside. But if you hear now Mr. Borrell and Mrs. von der Leyen, she was on the table discussing and planning the controlled demolition of the European, especially the German economy on the Davos, with the Davos oligarchs. And now coming along and saying, "Oh, we have to change this. This is hypocritic." She is one of the main courses. She went public and said, "We want the destruction. We want the Great Reset. We want the Green New Deal. We don't want fossil fuels," and so on and so on. So this is just hypocritic. But I think they now see that this is ending at a catastrophe, and it is costing their personal seat.
Meanwhile, a bigger developing country is rather short of fuel. But the rush for gas appears to be leaving developing countries rather short of fuel. With the rush for gas sending prices soaring, some traders have chosen to break contracts in order to serve lucrative European markets. So,
This has been particularly bad news for Pakistan. In the latest round of tenders, the country's state-run energy company, Pakistan LNG Limited, ended up with no contracts after failing to attract any bidders. It isn't the first time the country has recently been grappling with supply issues. For example, back in the spring, Islamabad received refusal notices from some of its LNG traders. It's unable to ship a number of scheduled cargoes as per contracts, reportedly forcing Pakistan to import LNG at record high prices. Well, a recent similar case Russia's Gazprom in Singapore since May. The disruption happened after Germany took temporary control of the unit back in the spring as part of the anti-Russia sanctions. Although Russia then allowed shipments to the company for 3 months after, with suspicions suggesting the company's new managements were perhaps selling the product on the spot market. Now, aside from Pakistan, high LNG prices have been painful for another South Asian country, Bangladesh, which is heavily dependent on imported natural gas for electricity. Recently, 80% of the country faced total blackouts due to a failure in the national power grid. Well, energy expert from Bangladesh, Mohammed Tamim, believes that countries deprived of essential fuel are returning to dirtier energy sources.
I think there is a demand destruction that has taken place because of the high price, and people are looking for alternate fuel. Even Bangladesh, who are thinking of long-term LNG import, are now diverting to some extent, and others are doing that too. Under the current situation, actually, it is do and die. I mean, it is a matter of, for obvious reason, we don't want to be contributing to the greenhouse gas emission, but we can't be in the dark either, because right now the economy is in a stagnant situation. It is not moving well. People are suffering. Productivity has gone down. So overall, it is not a very good picture. We are suffering, so we have no choice right now.
As EU states scramble to cover their energy needs, the Algerian and French prime ministers are visited by the French prime minister. It follows President Macron's visit to Algiers in August, a trip aimed at ending months of tensions between France and the major North African energy provider over multiple colonial-era issues. Let's get the thoughts and opinions now with Paris-based RT contributor Rachel Marston.
Algeria has something that Europe wants and needs, specifically underused natural gas export potential, despite already being Europe's biggest natural gas supplier after Russia and Norway. Now, this untapped potential has become even more important now that the EU sanctioned its other energy supplies from Russia and is now desperate to find some new ones. So French Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne took 16 other French ministers on a field trip to Algeria this week, where she's expected to ink deals on economic cooperation, including energy. Not like she's admitting it, though. Gas deliveries are, quote, not on the table, according to her office. It's just a coincidence that French ministers are suddenly hanging around Algeria like a bad smell, and that Algeria just happens to have gas potential in a time of dire French gas need. Or that while the French ministers are in Algeria, the EU Energy Commissioner is also set to attend an energy conference in the country. It was just a trip to the country, and he also said at the time that his focus was renewed bilateral relations, and executive officer of Paris-headquartered French energy company Engie just happened to be there riding shot French energy